Welcome everyone. We're at 7 o'clock, so we'll go ahead and get started. So I want to welcome everyone to another webinar from the Beef Reproduction Task Force. It's not letting me turn my video on for some reason, but I'm Dr. Shelby Rosasco. I'm an assistant professor and beef extension specialist at the University of Wyoming and one of the task force members. Thank you all for joining the webinars this spring. We really appreciate you guys supporting the program, and hopefully you guys are learning lots of good information. I've loved seeing where everybody is from in the chat this evening. One little bit of announcement before we get started. We are really excited to announce that we have finally set a location and date for this year's Applied Reproductive Strategies and Beef Cattle meeting. It will be in Cheyenne, Wyoming this year on September 6th and 7th. We will be posting more information about that in the next month or so, including all of the hotel information and registration links and everything like that. As we get started, just a reminder, if you have questions throughout the presentation, please place those in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. Tonight, I'm excited to introduce our speaker this evening, Dr. Sandy Johnson. She is a professor and extension specialist at Kansas State University and one of the founding members of the Beef Reproduction Task Force. She will be talking tonight on planning your synchronization program. So welcome, Sandy, and I'll turn the floor over to you.
Well, good evening, everyone. I was trying to figure out how to stream this on Facebook Live to our task force page, but I can't seem to get past I can only seem to get onto my own page. So we are recording this, and we'll have to use that as how we're going to, yeah, you can't watch it on Facebook Live tonight. That's just with the way life is. So I am going to get my screen shared here. Press all the right buttons. Okay, and are you seeing the are you seeing the right screen? I guess is my question to you.
That's the right screen.
It is the right screen. All right. Well, very good. Let's get started then this evening. And so planning, that's what we're all about this evening. And so what do we want to do this evening is make sure you're aware of our tools. Even people that might be familiar with some of them don't understand their schedule and updating. And then something that we don't ever seem to talk about really is, what about after the synchronization program? When are we going to turn in bulls and how many? Because most everybody stops AI at some point, and we need to make plans for that part of the program as well. So we'll cover that this time as well. So you're probably aware with our various protocol sheets, they do have a new updated look to them. I'm just showing you little pictures of the cow protocols and the heifer protocols. And this year we have added a natural service and heat detection protocol sheet. And we also have the sex semen sheet that I think we added that last year. So these are updated annually. You want to look for this date and understand that if you're looking at something with an older date, we really want you to look at the most current one. So if we think about implementing protocols, how you interpret what that protocol is and how it should be applied in your situation can be easily misinterpreted. And I like this, alligators can grow up to 20 feet, but most only grow 4. And to me, that really is indicates this whole, how do we interpret how you want us to apply these various protocols. So that's really where we came up with this synchronization planner, is to try and make sure you get the right thing on the right date. Now, Many of you are probably familiar with that, but understand that we make changes. Sometimes we find glitches, and thank you to those that speak up and say, is this really how it should be? Look for the date on the front. February 22nd was the most recent update. Usually if you're within the year, you should be okay. But if we would find some major glitch, then we would try and reach out to everybody's email address that they used when they download the planner to let you know about that. But as you know, sometimes our email systems do not allow us, sometimes those messages get lost in the junk. So just make sure you're always doing that on an annual basis to update your planner. And so the way this is designed is essentially to, if I have one group of animals, this is the calendar for that particular group of animals. And this just is an example. You can't probably see the detail, but the idea is, you know, and especially for something like an MGA protocol, it's telling you what day to start feeding, what day to end feeding, and, you know, it's going to count out then when prostaglandin would be given. So you don't have to worry about, did I count the days right? And then what's often most important is this interval between what's usually the last prostaglandin or the only prostaglandin and when we either start heat detection or do a fixed time day I, is that key period that we want to make sure and get right, and that you don't have time that you did this last step set you up for breeding females at 2 in the morning. Okay, those are the kinds of things we want to avoid. And of course, usually there's more people involved in our synchronization and AI program. So communication, this is just a great tool for doing that. You can do lots more with it, but this is easy to use. Jump in, try it, see what the various features are. What you may be less familiar with is that we have what we refer to as the MultiGroup Planner. Okay, and this might be for somebody that has enough cows that say they don't want to synchronize them so they all are bred on one day. Maybe they don't have quite enough arm power to do that, so they just want to break it into groups. Well, this allows you to put both or however many groups. I think we've got 12 months of calendar in there. You know, you can put a lot of different things in there. Again, it's, you know, has a date on it, and you want to look for that most recent edition. Now, in order to make this program work, it's got a little bit more programming to it. It might make sense to you if I'm going to synchronize multiple groups and put them on a calendar, that I have to save those bits of information and then accumulate them on a calendar. So before you use the MultiGroup Planner, I would really suggest you watch this video that's available at this download site at the Iowa Beef Center, or you can always get there from our beefrepro.org, go to the resources and decision tools will take you there. But this video kind of explains the steps you need to take in order to use this MultiGroup Planner. And it's not difficult, just want to watch that to get started. And we won't try and go through that detail this evening. But if you try it and have some problems, please let me or Garland know and be glad to work with you. And so just to give you an idea of what that looks like, then this is the basic input that's in both planners. The difference here is that we're going to identify the group of animals somehow. And because it allows us to also inventory our resources, we're going to put the number of head in there that we're going to have. And then we're here with our typical other choices: breed type, semen type, system type, and the protocol numbers. Those aren't showing on this screen that I have available, but they're listed below this when you're looking at it live. You can put in the date you want to start breeding and the time of day. And the time of day, of course, then becomes very important for those fixed timed AI protocols. You indicate what products you're using. You can add in a bull turn-in date if you want to, when you might want to Craig check those. I believe this date shows up as 30 days from this day to start breeding. And then you can put additional notes if you're, using a low birth weight bull. Certain breeds, you may want to shorten that gestation length to kind of get a better idea of when those first calves might come. Okay, so this is what we would put in for this first group, and we would save that. And then essentially what we're going to do is repeat that process for the additional groups that we have. And in this case, we've got a second group of heifers, going to be bred a little bit later. 2 different groups of cows, different dates, different protocols. And those can all be shown on a single calendar. Now, one 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper is going to show 1 month, and you would have those, then print as many of those pages as you needed based on the dates you included. Now, the other thing that this system can do is that you can add in tasks into that calendar. For example, we're going to reproductive track score these heifers on April 12th. Going to prepare to breed them by moving them somewhere else before that breeding date, so we can add these things into the calendar. Now, some people have asked if we're going to do a calendar for more aimed towards embryo transfer, and essentially the synchronization systems are the same. So you can still use this calendar. The challenge with us trying to find, there's enough variation in what recommendations are for some of those setups that it makes it, we haven't attempted to try and make a consolidated list of things. But you could easily, instead of reproductive track scoring, you're going to start your super ovulation protocol. So maybe that's injection 1, maybe it's 8 a.m. injection 1 on this date, then save that. Another thing might be 8 p.m. injection 2. However you do it, you can add those things to the calendar. This is a flush date, this is a transfer date, whatever it is. So hopefully this gives you some flexibility to be able to use that for broader purposes than what the original planner does. And then, as I mentioned, it does help you with inventory supplies. If you're a technician breeding lots of cows, this might help you make sure the client is ordering enough supplies to get the job done. This is from the person who has been out to breed something with no fresh sleeves with you. So do not be this person. Plan ahead, get adequate inventory. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about what happens after the AI program. At some point, we're going to turn in bulls, and when we do that, it depends a lot on our goals and what tools that we might want to use towards differentiating between AI and natural service, if that's important to us. Or the most important thing may be to maximize early conception. We'll talk about this part first. And we have some observational data that can kind of help us think about this. And this would be, again, observational data. This is the calving distribution of some cows that were fixed timed inseminated and had an early pregnancy detection done. So I think they were checked between 30 and 45 days. So if we saw anything with the ultrasound, it was going to be that AI pregnancy. And this highlights the AI sired calves based on that early ultrasound. And then there's an overlap of the cleanup bull sired calves, even though we had a 10-day gap between fixed timed AI and bull turnout. And that should make sense to us from the standpoint, we look at, these were all bred on one day, and we have this big range of days, and that's going to happen with the cleanup bulls as well. And so we can't just, if we truly need to identify those, a few days is, in this case, 10 days was not enough to cleanly separate them. All right. Now, we can use DNA technology, and a lot of times these calves are DNA tested anyway. So this is some observational data that some of my colleagues did outside of Manhattan, and they turned bulls in immediately after AI, and they took DNA samples from calves born in the first 21 days of those calving periods. And you see 2 years of data, both cows and heifers separated here. So roughly 5 to 10% of those calves born in the first 21 days were sired by the natural service sire, and about 15 to 20% of the cows. We don't have huge numbers here, but it kind of gives us an idea of what that overlap might be. And again, if you're taking DNA samples anyway, you could still differentiate these, and we'll look at some data in just a minute, whether or not that is getting you more early pregnancies or not. All right, so I next want to just share with you a little bit about a study that came out of Washington. And they were looking at using natural service with essentially with or without AI, and if they could improve that early pregnancy rate. So they did this in heifers, and in all cases then they used this base 7-day protocol. And so they had close to 1,800 heifers from 4 locations. Here's our base 7-day protocol. And then one group was strictly natural service. On day 2 after prostaglandin, they turned bulls in, and they left those in through day 8. And used a bull to cow ratio of 1 to 25. Then another group had fixed timed AI at 60 hours after prostaglandin, and the bulls were in during that same time period from 2 to 8 days, and again 1 to 25 ratio. Third group was strictly fixed timed AI at 60 hours. A fourth group had split time AI, the first insemination at 64 hours and the second at 80 hours. So during that days 2 to 8, they had received estrus detection patches. They were heat checked 3 times a day to monitor that estrus response. All right, then for these first 2 treatments, the bulls were turned in on day 22, which is essentially 2 weeks after the natural service bulls were pulled, and the ratio was 1 to 40. And for the other 2 only AI groups, bulls went in on day 16, and again at that same 1 to 40 ratio. All right, so first we're going to look at the estrus response rate. Remember, this is from this day to 2 to 8 period. And they had an excellent response in all groups. And so where they had bulls and bulls only, it was 86%, roughly the same with the bulls and timed AI. Timed AI alone was less than the timed AI with natural service. This gives us an idea that Perhaps the bull presence was stimulatory to that estrus behavior. And the split time AI group was also higher than the 60-hour timed AI. And that should make sense to you in that those that were bred at 60 hours would not have received GnRH, allowing more time for more of those females to come in heat at 84 hours. So that explains the difference that we kind of see between these two groups. All right, so the meat of it then is this first service pregnancy rate. And things are never quite as cut and dry as what we would like to see them, but just about 60% with natural service only. So just from a standpoint of noting, can we use bulls with synchronization and what type of bull to cow ratio? 1 to 25, 60% per service pregnancy rate. That looks fine to me. In the second group where we combined natural service with AI, we really didn't get any more pregnant by turning those bulls in. But because the estrus response was higher in this timed AI at 60 hours group, there was a higher pregnancy rate than when we compared these two groups. Split timed AI group then was kind of in the middle with similar to the natural service. But notice that the split timed AI was not significantly different from the single timed AI. We look at the entire breeding season length, then we see a similar pattern. The lowest pregnancy rate was in this timed AI group. And I believe that was 60 days total for that breeding season. Again, different from that timed AI plus natural service, the benefit of those bulls apparently. And then we see no difference between the split timed AI and the natural service only. All right, so we've talked about when we might turn them in and how that might impact the outcome based on the data we have. It's not perfect, but it's some observational data. Let's think about how many. And so the first part of that is, well, am I going to get 10% pregnancy rate or 80%? You know, it could be a wide range. What's the range of pregnancy rates to AI look like? It's been a year or two since I put this together, but I was trying to kind of look at the published literature, what does that range of AI pregnancy look like? And these would have been fixed timed AI reports. The red line is cow observations, and that's where most of that data is. And you'd see this peak here at 55. Heifers, maybe a little more variable. And that makes sense in that differences in cyclicity, lots of things going on. But again, the peak, although it's a little bit flat, is right in that area. So, you know, you've got to make a decision how many bulls you're going to turn out before you know what your AI pregnancy rate is. And so whether it's your historical data or something like this, you have to use that to inform your decision. And then, you know, there's always the case, there's some days when things just don't go right, and you hope to have a system set up to have a good AI pregnancy rate. But, you know, if things just didn't go well, maybe you should anticipate maybe that pregnancy rate is a little lower and think about the number of bulls differently from that. Now, one of the things people believe is that, okay, after we synchronize these cows, well, they're all going to be in heat 21 days later. Well, they're going to be spread out. They're spread out over, at least 2 or 3 days in our attempts to synchronize ovulation. So by the time they come back around again with no other intervention, this is a resynchronization study, and the bottom graph is the control animals. And so it's a 10-day spread. We have a peak here, and I think that is about 23% of the observations would have been the peak, and this is about 14% there. So yeah, they're not all coming in on one day. The resynchronization program used a cedar, and that can keep them from coming in heat. But one of our struggles with resynchronization is then we have lower fertility in that subsequent estrus, and we're not really set up to go in depth into resynchronization. But I want you to, they don't all come back in one day. And so this is really more strung out than the natural service. In the prior study I showed you, when we had bulls breeding heifers, that was a 6-day period, and this is a 10-day period, and they were able to cover those females. Now, another bit of data that kind of helps us think about how many bulls to turn out. Rick Funston and one of his students did a literature review looking at what information could be found where the bull to cow ratio is reported, as well as the breeding season length and AI pregnancy rate and final pregnancy rate. So this is kind of the control, an 88% pregnancy rate using what we would say is our fairly typical 1 to 20 to 1 to 30. I think the NOMS data would say 22 or 23 is the average on US basis. And so then in 13 of these reports, they use the same bull to cow ratio after AI as they would during the normal breeding season. So even though 56% of them were pregnant to AI, they were turning in as many bulls as if none of these were pregnant to AI. And you see that, numerically, these are the same. Other reports then, reporting from 1 to 30 to 1 to 49, a little bit lower pregnancy rate, fewer reports there. And that kind of goes with a slightly lower pregnancy rate. And then those that essentially assumed going to get half of the cows bred AI, turn in essentially half the number of bulls, or, this is doubling the amount of cows you might normally expose to one bull. And you see really similar results as across the board here. Again, this is observational, but it supports that we are able to reduce the number of bulls after AI. We always have to make sure we test those bulls. And, the thing we can't promise is our breeding soundness exams do not test for libido, and those problems do exist. All right, so let's look at one other piece of data. The Virginia Tech folks have looked at several years of their data. They work with a number of prison herds throughout the state. They have both fall and spring breeding seasons. So they had about 6 years worth of data here, 17 locations representing close to 15,000 cows and heifers. On average, they turned out 31 cows per bull, but ranged from anywhere from 9 to 73. And in terms of open cows per bull, so this is looking back at who conceived AI, subsequent were bred later. anywhere from 2 to 44 open cows per bull, and the average was 1 to 14. So their pregnancy rate to fixed timed AI during this period was about 59%. You see a range, and really that's similar to the range of pregnancy rates that I showed you in that earlier slide. The fall breeding season, the full season pregnancy rate was 92%, a little bit lower in the spring. You know, could that be because sometimes we're getting warmer as we get towards the end of that spring breeding season, so maybe fertility is not as good, and there may be some other potential issues there, but there was that fall and spring difference, although there was no difference between AI pregnancy rate in fall and spring. And again, that's observational things, looking at the data going in. So what they tried to do then is look at the relationship, and what we're looking at here is total cows per bull and the pregnancy rate for that group of cows. So each dot here is think of that as a pasture within a breeding season, all right? And so there was no relationship there in terms of total cows exposed per bull on the spring breeding season. In the fall breeding season, there was a significant relationship, all right, between total cows exposed per bull and the pregnancy rate, but only explained about 4% of the variation in that pregnancy rate. So significant statistically, yes. Does it tell us a lot? Maybe not. If we look at open cows per bull, again, looking at the same thing, the relationship here had a p-value of 0.1, and some people would say that's on the edge of significance, sometimes less than 0.1 on a large study we might consider. When they looked at the fall group of cows, there seemed to be an interaction then whether that fall sire was a single sire in that pasture or there were multiple sires. The red line is the multiple sires. And so the relative significance of this interaction is at a 0.086. So we're looking at as a tendency. All right, this is a large data set and it's a tendency. The single sire, the slope of this red line was significant, but it only explains about 12% of the variation in pregnancy rates. So I believe the authors would conclude that, well, let me show you one other way to look at this data that goes with that summary. So here they have divided these various bull to cow ratios into quartiles. So this represents anything from 1 to 10 to 1 to 24, 1 to 24 to 1 to 30, 1 to 30 to 1 to 38, and then up higher. And this would be the average bull to cow ratio then, 19, 27, 34, and 48. If you look at the pregnancy rate to fixed timed AI in those groups, all right at 55%, right? So that says that we weren't biasing what cows were exposed in these different, essentially pasture sizes. And then they were able to, based on their pregnancy detection timing and efforts, look at the pregnancy rate to that service after AI. And again, there was not any pregnancy rate difference there. You see some larger numerical differences between here and here, but not statistically significant. And then the pregnancy rate then on those subsequent, so like the third cycle on, again, not different. So taken all together, it would indicate to us that, you know, we probably don't need to have as many bowls as we would on a natural service only. And if you look at costs, certainly if you're able to reduce the number of bowls with your AI operation, it certainly improves the profitability of that particular operation. Everyone may view this a little bit differently and say, well, I see some downward trends as we're getting up here higher. And again, statistics would say that it is fairly weak, but obviously we need pregnant cows. This to me is a risk management issue, and we have to decide, you know, what risk you're willing to take, and you know what your other costs are to make those decisions. Okay, I mentioned that we do have a protocol sheet this year for natural service and heat detection. And our statement here, not sure if it's big enough for you to read, but you know, if you're going to use natural service with synchrony, you know, really the less synchrony, the better. Now, the heifer study I showed you earlier was fairly tight synchrony. They used a moderate number of bulls. They were able to cover those fine. As good a pregnancy rate as anything else we did. We do want to make sure that we're using bulls that are at least 2 years old, breeding soundness exam, you know, and we have, you know, this kind of bull sale season, we do have a lot of 18-month and 2-year-old bulls being sold now. You know, keep in mind if that's still their first breeding season, I mean, maybe experience is worth something. Maybe that's not where you start that bull on his first breeding season. But the recommendation then in general is this 1 to 25 bull to cow ratio. I mean, if you're going in a 2-section pasture, perhaps that's not an appropriate ratio. Again, I mentioned libido. We don't have a good repeatable test that I believe anyone's using. So that means it's up to us to monitor that breeding activity and make sure that the individuals that we're trusting to do that work actually get it done. So it doesn't need some follow-up on our part. All right, I want to let you know that we've kind of updated how we have put protocols on our website. And you see these now different drop-down menus. You can still get the protocol sheets on a 1-pager, but then you can also look at these individual protocols and a different way to present them. So take some time, go there, check that out. If you have any problems finding those things or see any glitches there, we just kind of went live with that. So hopefully it's all working as it should. Again, a lot of other resources on our website here. You can get all the past meeting information, look at those proceedings, listen to those talks. A lot of good stuff there. So I encourage you to look at that if you haven't. So that's where I want to wrap up this evening. This just indicates all the ways that we're trying to connect with folks, and I'm sorry that we're not streaming live on Facebook tonight. And I thought I knew what I needed to do, but such is life. We are getting this recorded. So I guess at this point, we're ready to start looking at what questions have come in.
Thank you, Sandy. That was a great presentation. A lot of good information in there. We've had quite a few questions coming in. So if you haven't put your question in the Q&A box, please feel free to type that question in there. I will start reading some questions to you. Sandy here So the first question is asking your opinion on using a second insemination. So inseminating once at the correct time and then inseminating with a second straw 12 hours after that initial straw. Is that worth the extra labor and expense?
You know, when I was in graduate school, one of my colleagues was actually looking at some of that data, and my recollection is that, you know, there was no difference, and that was looking at embryo data, you know, where we're really trying hard to get as many embryos as possible. I don't know that I've seen anything recently on that, but we have done some, there has been some smaller data sets that did inseminate like 12 hours apart. And again, I don't believe there's, you know, shown any significant difference in pregnancy rate from doing that. You know, there's times when, you know, we used to think, well, they stayed in heat a long time, so we should breed them again. But as we look at some of the heat watch data that, you know, gives us a good idea when they start coming in heat, it's probably more important that we time that insemination from when they first come in heat, because that probably drives when ovulation occurs. And unless this is just an individual that's not following the book on anything. So in my mind, one is generally going to be enough. And, you know, everybody has their risk tolerance. And if it makes you feel better to put 2 in, well, maybe that's important. But I'm going to put 1 in most of the time.
Thanks. So the next question is about using the Multimin 90 product. If you know of any research or anybody that's had really good success with that, and they're kind of just asking what your thoughts were on using that Multimin product before a timed AI protocol.
Right. Well, we've got several studies here at K-State that have looked at Multimin. Some have shown a positive effect, others have not. And I think that would describe a lot of the data out there if you would review all the literature. You know, and to me, it really depends on, you know, if it's going to be beneficial, there is a need in your mineral program existing. It's not going to be a magic. If you inject any blue liquid, it's not going to improve pregnancy rates. It is a tool in the toolbox. It may fit your situation, depending on what your choices are to get a quality mineral into those animals, and if truly they have mineral deficiencies based on the rest of their diet. So it's a tool to consider. It's may or may not improve your conception rate depending on your situation.
So there's a couple questions where they want you to kind of touch on the difference in conception rates between timed AI and then heat detection in AI.
Okay, so there's a couple ways to approach that. You know, essentially, the first study I showed you where those females were bull bred in the first treatment versus the others that were timed AI would say that no, there isn't a difference between need to go back and don't take the question away so fast from me.
Oh, sorry.
Make sure that I'm staying on track here. You know, so if we've done a good job of synchronizing those cows, and that's going to probably depend on, you know, were they all cycling, what they look like. If we do a really good job of preparing our cows, there's probably not going to be a difference between timed AI and heat detection. And if you go back and look at some of the early data, those can be very similar. And part of that you see when we look at cycling and non-cycling cows prior to the treatment. Sometimes the pregnancy rates are higher in those non-cycling cows, or, you know, the same, or in some cases they're numerically higher. So we're really doing a good job with those. and you wouldn't likely get those if you were just doing heat detection. So that conception rate difference can vary on the situation. You know, if you're able to heat detect, yeah, you're probably going to do better timing that year in, year out, but you may not beat it by much if you do a good job of getting your cows ready and implementing your system.
Great. So there was a couple other questions that really just touched on, success of the sync programs. Do the type of, drugs matter? So estimate versus lute. They also had a question that was similar to that on, how many days postpartum should the earliest cow be in the Estrus sync programs?
Okay. So let's go with that earliest postpartum first. So the further we are postpartum, say between 20 days and 50 days, we're going to see a gradual improvement in that response and pregnancy rate. If I'm looking at a group of cows, I'm probably going to put a cedar in everything that's at least 20 days since calving when I put that cedar in. She's really short, but if I can move her up a cycle, that's worth it to me. And so if you're, depending on, some people group their cows and they're only going to breed these early cows anyway. You can also try some of those shorter term cows. You don't have to put the most expensive semen in them. Maybe you can move them up. How many of them are there? If there's not too many, grouping them with that same group, I think, is worth it, plus trying to bring them up. Okay, the other question in terms of different products, there are some different label claims on the GnRH products, and supposedly different half-lives on the prostaglandins. But on a practical basis, we've not been able to measure any difference in pregnancy rate that I'm aware of based on, product A or product B. Are you getting product support from that company? What's the cost? Most important thing is probably getting it into the animal correctly on a timely manner.
Great, thanks. So there was a question on somebody who's looking at using a 7-day cedar protocol in their cows, and they're wanting to potentially try to split that group of cows. So would it be okay if they pulled the cedar on day 8 rather than day 7 for half of the cows?
Well, the way I always answer this is, well, you can do whatever you want, okay? I don't have a lot of data to support this mixed approach. There have been people look at some longer protocols. It's usually 9 or 14 days. If you're going to heat check, sometimes these things will have little impact on you. Bigger chance of impact if you're trying to do a fixed time day I. If you would want to make any timing adjustment based on when you pull the cedars, or time when if you're gonna fix time day I those off of when you pull the cedars. But I won't promise you the same results. Might work okay. We have this range of pregnancy rates that's still out there. And, anytime we try to make these adjustments, we're adding some risk in the program. So I'll leave it at that. And I don't know if anybody else, Shelby or Lee, you want to make any comments on some of those adjustments. But that's my thoughts.
Yeah, I think my opinion would be adjust at your own risk, right?
Yeah.
So there are several questions both in the chat as well as the Q&A box about the 7 and 7 protocol specifically in heifers, and how that compares to some of the other heifer protocols that we have available.
Okay. I don't know that the data is published yet, but Vitor, one of our colleagues, has done some work on the 7 and 7 compared to the 7-day co-sync. My recollection is they didn't find any. If there was a difference between those, it wasn't much. Again, the estrus response is typically higher with that protocol. We didn't see any overall pregnancy rate advantage to the cows as we've accumulated more data. And I think there's, to my knowledge right now, all I've seen is Vitor's data set on about, I don't know, 12 or 1,500 heifers. And yeah, I remember if it's a couple percentage points different. Yeah, I'd have to pull that up and look at it, but it's, we have some very good protocols, and everybody in everybody's mind is, well, the next protocol is going to be that much better and it's going to make all the difference in the world. Again, the estrus response is higher, but since the pregnancy rate on the cows is staying similar, that's telling us maybe we're not getting some of the follicular turnover we need, and we're getting a little lower conception rate on some of those cows. I don't know that, we don't have enough data, but good estrus response. Not sure we're getting more pregnancies, may or may not. The 7 and 7 is shown in the planner for heifers, I believe now. So that information is there.
So next question is about, are there any research studies doing direct comparisons between using MGA versus a cedar, and your opinions on that?
Yeah, so a number of years ago, there was a study, multi-location, don't remember the total number of animals in there, but pretty good number, compared MGA prostaglandin, 7-day co-sync, and the 14-day cedar. There wasn't any statistical difference in that study between those three. And, as I look at those options, sometimes I feel like there's more variability with the 7-day, but when I try to rationalize that in my mind, that this shorter term protocol right before I'm going to breed them is more variable than a protocol that starts 30 days before, and then I just give them an injection of prostaglandin. It works wonderful. I just it seems like if everything we think is true about controlling follicular growth, and that 7-day would just certainly have to be a lot better. But animals don't always respond like they think they do. So as I evaluate those three protocols, what fits in your system? Is feeding MGA even an option? How much handling, how that fits in there? But those are important parts of the discussion.
Great. I think we're getting close. We're getting through a lot of these. I know we're kind of peppering you with questions. So the next one is on estrus detection patches. Do you still think they're a great tool to use when using the AI? It's kind of a confusing question, but do you still use them in your timed AI? I think is what they're trying to get at, protocols.
Okay, so when I think about using estrus detection patches in a timed AI protocol, one of the things that I can do with those, anytime a cow, we know she's been in heat, we don't need to give her GnRH at fixed timed AI. somewhere I have a little spreadsheet or a table that looks at, you know, how many cows you'd have to detect in heat to essentially pay for the Estrus patches. And yeah, you'd have to go back to an old beef tips article to see just what that number is, but it to me was very reasonable on a typical number that you might find in heat using those estrus detection patches and saving that GNRH based on the assumed cost of GNRH and the patches at that time. So I think it is a tool that can save you some product use, which, you know, we have to inject them one last time. I think that's probably a good thing. Did that get to the gist of the question?
Yeah, I think they were just wondering on if you pick up enough animals in heat, you know, by using the patches in that fixed timed AI protocol to make it worth using those patches. So you had another question. I think some of these are more just planning at the beginning. So one of them was on timing of putting cedars in. I know we typically don't, you know, give them a time to put cedars in. Do you have any recommendations or opinions on that?
So we're talking about time of day. I'm not sure. So we've tried to take of what's in the planner, you know, even if I'm doing a 7-day protocol, I don't care if you put the cedar in at 8 o'clock or 2 o'clock in the afternoon. I'm more concerned about the time you take that out and when you, you know, if you're doing fixed time day AI. So if that's what you mean about when you put the cedar in, how
Yep.
I would answer that.
Yep, I was in the middle of typing. No, we typically don't have a time that we tell you to put the cedar in.
Okay.
Recommendations on needle gauge and length when giving the injections of the hormones. And then they also asked injection site.
All right. So if we're using an intramuscular injection on a cow, probably want to use an 1.5-inch needle. Utilize Hycon is a product that's designed to go sub-Q, so you need probably a 3/4-inch needle for cows. I like to use 18 gauge needles if I can. Sometimes I wish I had 16s, but I try to use 18 and change frequently. And you may have a situation where you need to change needles on every cow. If you don't, but some people do. And so you want to follow those label directions. If I'm giving an IM injection to heifers, I might be able to get away with an inch needle. They don't have that depth of hide, but you know, we want to get it in the muscle, and 1 to 1.5 inches, and certainly 1.5 inches for the cows, I think is what we should do. They're designed to go in the neck. There's people that have tried to, you know, claim, well, if I give it in the rump, it's closer to the ovary, it's going to work better. Well, people have actually done those studies. No, it doesn't work any better. Follow beef quality assurance guidelines, label directions for how to administer those, both in volume and location.
Great. Trying to lump some of these questions together for you.
Okay.
They're still coming in pretty good. There's another question that's just asking about differences in results with different sync protocols. You know, I think you already touched on that a little bit. I don't know if you want to expand at all on, you know, are there protocols that you feel work better than others, and how can they make that decision?
Yeah, so I go back to, you know, our best suggestions are in the protocol sheets. There's tons of things that have been tried and you could do. We've already created the short list. What fits in your situation? There are probably other people that might give you favorites. I'm basing my opinions on the data that I see, and it has a statistical test with it. But, you know, people are always going to have their preferences, but, you know, make it fit your situation. People need to spend more time on getting the cows ready and everything else over the protocol. Okay, that's going to make a bigger difference in your results than probably protocol A, B, or C. Get the cows ready, do it right, worry about those things.
So there's a couple questions that are asking about having you address differences in overall pregnancy rates related to breeding season length.
Okay. Well, the impact of the breeding season length and overall pregnancy rate would be largely dependent on what's going into that. All right. So take a situation where I have only retained heifers that were bred AI. All right. So they're all calving early to begin with. So as they start cycling again, because they calved early, they're going to have more time to recover. We can get away with a shorter breeding season in that situation and still have a high pregnancy rate than we would a group of cows that calved over 120 days, right? Those are kind of the extreme situations. I can leave my bulls out for 120 days or longer, and I still can have a short calving period depending on how I manage those cows. And maybe even though bulls are left out a long time, I am at pregnancy detection identifying those, not only the opens, but the shortbreds, and allowing those individuals to find a new home where they fit better than in your herd. And so if you can control the length of your calving period, that allows you a lot of advantages then in terms of what's going to happen in that next calving period. And so if we think just about heifers, you know, there's some people that expect to get a higher percentage of heifers bred. Okay, these are yearling heifers. You look at Missouri's data, starting with usually an AI season at the beginning, 60 to 90 days breeding season. I think their average number last time I looked was like 88% pregnancy rate. Some of those heifers are just not going to get pregnant from one reason or the other. And so depending on what we allow into our system, that's going to drive a lot of that question. And you can make management decisions to keep that calving period shorter that, you know, tightens up a lot of things and helps your management, because the closer those cows are in their stage of production, we can feed them more precisely, we can vaccinate them in a more timely manner. You know, now I'm kind of getting away from the gist of the question, but, you know, there's not just one answer to the length of the breeding season and pregnancy rate. You got to know what's going into that. And, you know, it's a multidimensional factor. If you got a long calving period and want to shorten it, I'll be happy to work with you on doing that.
Great. So there's a couple questions on embryo transfer and recip cows. The first one was, is there any type of planner for helping to plan embryo transfer synchronization? And then are there any sync protocols that you would recommend for recip cows in an embryo transfer program? And Lee, you might jump in on this one as well.
Yeah, so essentially we're going to recommend the same protocols, whether you're setting up recips or trying to, you know, synchronize ovulation as part of the super ovulation. Those protocols are the same. You can still set that up in the planner. You can add additional activities into the planner that, you know, this is the day we're going to flush. or install embryos, you can type that into that MultiGroup Planner. Lee, you want to add any more to that?
No, that's well, I can add a little bit, Sandy. We've a couple of years ago, a lot of people were going to the 7 and 7 protocol, thinking that that was going to be the ticket. And we've seen, and I've heard, talk to other practitioners this year, some people are seeing no real difference between the 7 and 7 overall, either on overall pregnancy rate and overall recip usage. As you mentioned before, most of the time we see a few more cows in standing heat, but unfortunately that doesn't always equate to more pregnancies. But I know in our programs we've seen over the winter and early spring, we've seen some wrecks with the 7 and 7, and we've seen some wrecks with the 7-day select and or co. And then we've also seen some really good results with both protocols. So in our hands, we haven't seen a tremendous difference between the two. And the big thing is just making sure that you've got adequate days postpartum and good body condition. Those two things are really important. Good nutrition program obviously is important as well, but the body condition of the cows is going to probably be the biggest factor I've seen in successful programs versus not.
Two questions left. So there's a couple questions that are touching on if you can provide some information on using like a teaser bull or a chemically altered bull. Do you think that helps improve conception rates to AI?
So there, and I remember this is clear because it was when I was an undergraduate working with Jim Kinder. They were looking at bull exposure and showed some of those cows started cycling sooner using bull exposure. And, there are bull effects if you can manage those. He was measuring return to estrus and not necessarily pregnancy rates. I don't know if there's data that shows those cows getting pregnant earlier. The first study that I showed this evening indicated that perhaps there was a benefit of having those natural service sires in, even though they timed a item as well, they had a higher estrus response. So that's one data set observation that it could be beneficial. And the other part of that is back to, well, it depends how close are those cows to cycling on their own. And, you also have to think about, if the bull's running with the cows year round, we're probably not going to have that effect. Excuse me, because it's not novel. So if it's happening because we can't separate them, we may not have that benefit. And then the next question is, well, how long might they have to be away? I don't know that we know the answer to that question. So there might be some benefits. Don't know what the cows are like to start with. That probably has a lot to do with what the benefit is. And, certainly if you can manage it, feel like it's helping, why that's good information.
Great, thanks. So the last questions are just asking about on the recip side of things again, is there a specific recommendation for the days postpartum? And Lee, this might be going back to what you just talked about. Is there a body condition score recommendation for those recip cows?
Probably don't want to get them too fat. I think those recips you want, you know, we typically say we'd like cows at a body condition score, mature cows 5 at calving. You know, if they're recip cows and you want to have them 5.5 at calving and keep them there, I think that's great. I don't know that we have a lot of data that might differentiate between 5.5 and 6. You know, we have to think of global nutrition when we're looking at that recip cow. So not just protein and energy, but think about trace mineral portion of it. So you just want to have, you know, do a good job year round with your nutrition. And I think too often we're focused just right before breeding on these things, but we really need to be thinking about our year-round nutritional management to make those good recips and cows will respond well to AI. Lee, if you've got comments, why? Have at it.
Sorry, I'm on my phone and I was muting. I got some background noise, but no, I completely agree with everything you said, Sandy. The big thing as far as days postpartum, you know, we just, when a cow starts cycling in, you know, after having a calf depends on her body condition. And if you've got recip cows that are body condition score 4, you know, you've got some pretty steep slope along the back line. You're showing a lot of ribs. You can see, you know, rib number 9, 10, 11, you know, then you're in a too poor of a body condition. You really need to pour the feed to those cattle. But if they calve in a body condition score, like you said, better than 5, then the chances of them cycling, coming back into heat 50 days, 45 to 50, you know, 60 days after calving are going to be really high. And then they're going to go ahead and conceive or get pregnant to that embryo at the first transfer. And you know, that's where the money is. So yeah, all those things, just picking, watching the body condition. And you're exactly right. Managing body condition and nutrition year round is far better than trying to catch up between calving and breeding. So the best time to manage body condition is in that period of time between preg check and calving. So a good nutrition program, like you said, including everything, vitamins, minerals, protein, energy, and all of that is absolutely essential.
Well, that was all the questions we had. Thanks, Sandy, for a great presentation and taking the time to answer all those questions. I know there was quite a few of them. If any of you have additional questions later on, you're always welcome to use the Ask the Expert box on our Beef Reproduction website. We try to get back to you as quickly as possible and get those questions answered for you. This recording will get posted on our YouTube channel. Sandy has the information there on how to connect with us on the website and on social media, and you can find more information about upcoming webinars and those kind of things. Just want to remind you guys that we'll have more information coming out about our Applied Reproductive Strategies meeting that will be in September in Cheyenne, Wyoming. So thank you guys all for sticking with us this evening, and thanks again, Sandy.
Yeah, we should come back with another webinar in a month. I don't remember what date that is, but we'll see you back here in a month.
Good job, Sandy.